England, 1809. Some scars are worn on the skin, others are buried so deep that even mirrors cannot reflect them. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Hartley House, casting pale rectangles of light across the worn oak floors. Lady Genevieve Hartley stood in the estate office, her back to the door, one hand pressed flat against the leather-bound ledger that held 7 years of meticulous accounting. Her other hand traced absently along the left side of her face, fingers following the familiar ridges of puckered flesh that stretched from temple to collarbone. 26 years old, and she had not looked at her reflection in 3 years. There seemed little point. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew her attention to the window. Genevieve stepped back instinctively, positioning herself in shadow. Through the distorted glass, she watched a travelling coach round the curved drive, horses' hooves churning the summer dust into small clouds that hung in the still air. "Genevieve!" Her sister's voice rang through the hallway, accompanied by hurried footsteps. "Genevieve, where are you?" Lady Philippa Hartley burst into the office, cheeks flushed from running, her blonde curls escaping their pins. At 22, Philippa possessed the kind of luminous beauty that turned heads in drawing rooms and at country assemblies. She looked nothing like her elder sister. "You must come at once," Philippa gasped, pressing one hand to her chest. "I have just returned from Bath, and oh, the news I bring is dreadful." Genevieve closed the ledger carefully, making certain her left side remained angled away from the bright window. "What has father done now? How did you know it concerned him?" Philippa moved closer, her blue eyes wide with distress. "Because it always does," Genevieve replied, her voice steady despite the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. "Tell me." Philippa sank into the worn chair by the desk, her travelling dress rustling. "He has been in London these past 3 weeks. You know how he gets when he goes to the city." Genevieve knew. The Viscount Edmund Hartley possessed many qualities, but restraint in gambling houses was not among them. "He lost a considerable sum at cards," Philippa continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though speaking quietly might somehow lessen the severity. "Aunt Cornelia told me the whole of it. Father offered Hartley House itself as guarantee to settle the debt." The words hung in the air between them. Genevieve felt her fingers tighten on the edge of the desk. "To whom?" she asked, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "The Duke of Lockhart." Philippa twisted her hands together in her lap. "Aunt Cornelia says he is one of the wealthiest men in England. Very proud, very cold. And he is coming here in 3 days to inspect the property and decide whether to accept it as payment." Genevieve turned back to the window, her mind already calculating. Hartley House was old, the lands not particularly profitable, the furnishings shabby from years of neglect. But it was home. The only home she had known since childhood, the only place where she could live without being stared at or pitied or avoided. 3 days, she repeated softly. Yes. Philippa rose and moved to stand beside her sister, careful as always to approach from the right side. "Genevieve, what are we to do? If the Duke takes Hartley House, where shall we go? Father has no funds to provide for us elsewhere." Genevieve looked down at her hands. They were capable hands, neither delicate nor particularly graceful, but they had kept Hartley House running for 7 years, while her father gambled away what remained of their mother's dowry. She had managed the tenants, negotiated with merchants, balanced accounts that should have been impossible to balance. "We have 3 days," Genevieve said, straightening her shoulders. "Then we shall use them. This house may be old, but it can at least appear respectable. Call Mrs. Henley and tell her to gather every housemaid we have. The Duke of Lockhart will find Hartley House in the best condition it has been in a decade." Philippa's face brightened slightly. "Do you truly think it will help?" "I think," Genevieve replied carefully, "that we have little choice but to try." The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity that Hartley House had not seen in years. Genevieve directed operations from within, never venturing into the main rooms where sunlight streamed through the tall windows. She kept to the shadows, to the service corridors and back offices, where her presence would not discomfort the servants who had grown accustomed to her reclusiveness. Mrs. Henley, the housekeeper who had served the Hartley family for 30 years, supervised the actual cleaning with determined efficiency. Floors were scrubbed, silver was polished, carpets were beaten until clouds of dust billowed into the summer air. The library received particular attention, Genevieve insisted, for surely a man of the Duke's standing would wish to see what intellectual resources the estate possessed. Though heaven knows most of these volumes have not been opened since your dear mother passed, Mrs. Henley remarked, running her cloth along a row of leather spines. The late Viscountess did love her books. Genevieve said nothing. Her mother had loved many things, including both her daughters, but she had never quite known how to comfort Genevieve after the fire. The awkward silences, the averted eyes, the careful positioning of furniture so that visits might be conducted with minimal discomfort, all these small cruelties of kindness had driven Genevieve deeper into isolation long before consumption finally claimed her mother 4 years ago. On the morning of the Duke's arrival, Genevieve rose before dawn. She had not slept well, her dreams troubled by memories she thought she had buried. The smell of smoke, the sound of a child's terrified screaming, the sensation of heat so intense, it felt like being swallowed by the sun itself. She dressed in her customary manner, choosing a high-necked gown of dark green that covered her throat and the worst of the scarring that extended down her neck. Her hair, thick and chestnut brown, she arranged carefully to fall forward on the left side, a curtain between her face and the world. Philippa found her in the office at 9:30, bent over the account books. "Surely you are not working on such a day," Philippa said, her voice gentle. "The accounts must be kept current," Genevieve replied without looking up. "Particularly if they are to pass to new ownership." "Genevieve," Philippa moved closer, "will you not come down when the Duke arrives? You are the one who has managed everything here. He should meet you." "No." The word came out more sharply than Genevieve intended. She softened her tone. "You will represent the family far better than I could. You have our mother's grace and manner. Besides, Father will return from London tonight. He can conduct whatever discussions are necessary." Philippa opened her mouth to protest, but the distant sound of hooves on the drive silenced her. They both turned toward the window. The carriage that rolled into view was the finest thing Genevieve had ever seen. Black lacquered wood gleamed in the sunlight, brass fittings polished to a mirror shine. 4 matched bays pulled it with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of extensive training and careful handling. "Oh my," Philippa whispered. "That is true wealth, is it not?" Genevieve did not answer. She watched as a footman in immaculate livery descended first, opening the carriage door with practiced formality. A moment later, a tall figure emerged. Even from this distance and this angle, Nicholas Claiborne, Duke of Lockhart, commanded attention. He was perhaps 30, though it was difficult to judge precisely. His dark hair was cut in the current fashion. His coat fit his broad shoulders with the kind of perfection that required an exceptional tailor. He moved with the unconscious authority of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. "I must go," Philippa said, smoothing her skirts nervously. "I should be there to greet him." "Yes," Genevieve agreed, though her eyes remained fixed on the figure below. "Go." After Philippa left, Genevieve allowed herself to step closer to the window, knowing she could not be seen from below. The Duke was speaking to his companion now, an older gentleman in sober black who carried a leather case, his man of business most likely. She watched as Philippa appeared at the entrance, offering a curtsy that would have done credit to a royal presentation. The Duke acknowledged her with a slight bow, his expression unreadable from this distance. They disappeared into the house, and Genevieve retreated from the window. She would remain here, in the office, surrounded by her carefully maintained records. Whatever happened next would happen without her presence or her participation. It was safer that way, safer for everyone. But fate, as Genevieve had learned 7 years ago in a burning building, rarely cared much for what was safe. The journey to Willowmere Estate took the better part of a day, the carriage rattling through the Kentish countryside as summer gave way to the first whispers of autumn. Genevieve sat with her travelling case at her feet and a leather portfolio clutched in her lap, watching through the window as the landscape shifted from the familiar rolling hills near Hartley House to the flatter, more prosperous farmlands of Kent. She had left her sister standing on the steps that morning, Philippa's eyes bright with unshed tears. "Write to me every week," Philippa had insisted, gripping Genevieve's hands. "Promise me you will not hide away there as you have hidden here." Genevieve had promised, though they both knew the truth. Hiding was what she did best. The agreement reached with the Duke of Lockhart had been both simpler and more complex than she had imagined. After discovering her meticulously maintained account books during his inspection, after witnessing her unexpected skill with the panicked horse in the stable yard, Nicholas Claiborne had made his proposition with the same cool directness he seemed to apply to all matters. "I have a property in Kent that has operated at a loss for 3 years," he had said, standing in the estate office, while she remained carefully angled away from the afternoon light. "3 administrators have failed to rectify the situation. Your records demonstrate capabilities they lacked. Work for me for 1 year. If Willowmere shows improvement, your father's debt will be cancelled entirely. There would be one further condition," he had added, his gaze steady. "Your father must cease the habits that led him to my gaming table in the first place. I will not underwrite a man determined to ruin the people who depend upon him." She had wanted to refuse. The thought of leaving Hartley House, of being seen by strangers, of managing a household where she could not simply retreat to familiar shadows, had filled her with a cold dread. But Philippa's future depended on maintaining some semblance of respectability, and their father's gambling would destroy them all if left unchecked. So she had agreed, with strict conditions about working discreetly, about limiting social interactions, about being allowed to structure her days as she saw fit. The Duke had accepted her terms without argument, which should have reassured her, but somehow did not. Now, as the carriage turned down a tree-lined drive, Genevieve caught her first glimpse of Willowmere. The house rose from manicured grounds, a substantial manor built of warm, honey-coloured stone. 3 stories tall, with tall windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun and chimneys that spoke of numerous hearths within. It was beautiful. It was also far larger than she had anticipated. The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, and a footman appeared to open the door. Genevieve descended carefully, keeping her left side turned away, as she had learned to do instinctively. A woman in her middle years stood waiting at the top of the steps, her grey dress and crisp white apron marking her as the housekeeper. "Lady Genevieve," the woman said, offering a respectful curtsy. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Finch, housekeeper of Willowmere. His Grace sent word of your arrival. Welcome." "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," Genevieve replied, noting the woman's careful neutrality of expression. No shock, no pity, no poorly concealed discomfort. Either the Duke had warned her, or Mrs. Finch possessed exceptional composure. "I have prepared the blue suite in the west wing," Mrs. Finch continued, gesturing toward the house. "It offers privacy and an excellent view of the gardens. I thought you might prefer quarters away from the main entertaining rooms." "That was thoughtful," Genevieve said, grateful for the woman's perceptiveness. She followed Mrs. Finch inside, through a grand entrance hall with marble floors and a sweeping staircase, past drawing rooms and parlours that spoke of wealth and good taste, if not recent attention. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. The air held the slightly musty quality of rooms long closed. The blue suite proved to be a generous apartment consisting of a sitting room, bedchamber, and small private study. The furnishings were old but well made, the walls papered in a faded pattern of cornflowers and ivy. Most importantly, the windows faced west, offering light without the harsh exposure of southern or eastern aspects. "The estate office is on the ground floor, just past the library," Mrs. Finch explained as Genevieve's travelling case was brought in. "His Grace left all the relevant documents there for your review. The steward, Mr. Pemberton, departed 3 weeks ago, so you will be managing affairs directly with the tenants and merchants." "I see," Genevieve said, already calculating the challenges. "How many tenants are there currently?" 15 farming families, my lady, plus the household staff here, which numbers 22 at present. It was 30 before the economies began." Economies, a polite word for the decline that had apparently been plaguing Willowmere for years. "I should like to begin reviewing the accounts this afternoon," Genevieve said. "But first, perhaps you might tell me honestly what the difficulties have been here." Mrs. Finch glanced toward the door, then back to Genevieve. "May I speak plainly, my lady? I would prefer it. The last 3 administrators were London men who knew figures but not farming. They made decisions that looked sensible on paper but proved disastrous in practice. Crop rotations were disrupted. Traditional agreements with tenants were broken. Good men were dismissed, while incompetent ones remained because they flattered the administrators. The tenants have lost faith in the estate's management. Many are considering leaving when their leases expire. Genevieve absorbed this information, her mind already beginning to sort through possible solutions. And the household staff, what is their view? We serve His Grace, and we will serve whomever He appoints to manage Willowmere, Mrs. Finch said carefully. But if I may say so, my lady, you are not what we expected. Few people expect me, Genevieve replied quietly. But I assure you, Mrs. Finch, I am quite capable of managing accounts and tenants, even if I am not what one might consider a typical administrator. Something shifted in the housekeeper's expression, a slight warming. I believe you are, my lady. Shall I have tea sent to the study while you review the accounts? That would be welcome, thank you. After Mrs. Finch departed, Genevieve allowed herself a moment to stand at the window, looking out over the grounds. Gardens stretched below, somewhat overgrown, but showing evidence of good bones beneath the neglect. Beyond them, fields rolled away toward distant woods, the late summer wheat golden and ready for harvest. This place could thrive again. She could see it, could envision what it might become with proper attention and sensible management. The thought sparked something in her that had lain dormant for years, something that felt dangerously close to purpose. She turned from the window and made her way downstairs to the estate office. The accounts, when she spread them across the broad desk, told a story of systematic mismanagement. The previous administrators had indeed understood figures. They had simply applied them to the wrong problems. Money had been spent on ornamental improvements to the house, while essential repairs to tenant cottages went unaddressed. Seed had been purchased without regard to local soil conditions. Labour costs had ballooned while productivity declined. Genevieve worked through the afternoon and into the evening, her tea growing cold as she traced the patterns of failure through 3 years of records. She made notes in her clear, precise hand, listing problems and potential solutions, cross-referencing with the maps of the estate that hung on the office walls. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the footsteps in the hallway until a voice spoke from the doorway. I see you have wasted no time. Genevieve's head snapped up. The Duke of Lockhart stood framed in the doorway, still dressed in riding clothes, dust from the road clinging to his boots. She had not expected to see him for weeks. Instinctively, she angled her body so that her right side faced him, her left obscured by shadow and the fall of her hair. Your Grace, she said, rising. I did not know you were expected. I was not, he replied, stepping into the room with that easy confidence she had observed at Hartley House. But I was nearby on other business and thought to see how you had settled. I trust Mrs. Finch has made you comfortable. Very comfortable, thank you. His grey eyes moved past her to the papers spread across the desk. You have been reviewing the accounts. Yes, they are quite illuminating. That is a polite description, he said dryly. Disastrous might be more accurate. Disastrous implies hopelessness, Genevieve replied. These accounts suggest incompetence, which is at least correctable. Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly for her to identify. You sound confident. I am confident in facts and figures, Your Grace. People and soil and weather are more variable, but the principles of sound management remain constant. He moved closer to the desk, and she had to resist the urge to step back, to maintain distance. He was very tall, she realized, at least 6 feet, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill available space. What have you identified so far? He asked, nodding toward her notes. Genevieve hesitated, then decided that directness was perhaps the wisest course with a man like Nicholas Claiborne. Your previous administrators spent money on appearance rather than function. They disrupted crop rotations, alienated your most reliable tenants, and failed to invest in the very resources that might have improved productivity. Willowmere has been treated as a problem to be solved through London business principles, rather than as a living enterprise requiring knowledge of agriculture and human nature. She expected him to be offended. Instead, he smiled slightly, transforming his austere features into something unexpectedly appealing. My grandmother once told me that I surrounded myself with men who could calculate interest rates but could not tell barley from wheat, he said. I'm beginning to think she was correct. Your grandmother sounds wise. She is also interfering and occasionally infuriating, but yes, fundamentally wise. He pulled out the chair across from hers and sat without invitation, which somehow did not feel like presumption, so much as simple practicality. Tell me your plan. Genevieve blinked at him. Now? Why not? I am here, and you clearly have thoughts on the matter. So she told him. About the need to visit each tenant personally to rebuild trust, about crop rotations that actually suited Kent's soil, about repairs prioritized by necessity rather than visibility, about negotiating better terms with merchants who had been overcharging because no one had bothered to question their invoices. He listened without interrupting, his grey eyes never leaving her face. If he noticed the scars, he gave no sign. If he found her presence unsettling, his expression revealed nothing. How long do you estimate before showing improvement? He asked when she finished. 3 months to establish better relationships and systems. 6 months before it shows in the accounts. And if you achieve this, then Willowmere will be profitable again, and you will have a property worth keeping rather than a burden to be managed from a distance. He leaned back in his chair, still studying her with that unnerving intensity. You could have refused my offer. I could have. But then my father's debt would have remained, Hartley House would have been forfeit, and my sister's prospects would have been destroyed by association with a bankrupt family. She met his gaze steadily, despite the urge to look away. I prefer solutions to problems, Your Grace. Nicholas, he said abruptly, if we are to work together, you may use my given name when we are private. That would be inappropriate. More inappropriate than my sitting in your study at dusk without a chaperone? He raised an eyebrow. We have already dispensed with most of the usual proprieties. Lady Genevieve. What is one more? She wanted to argue, but he had a point. Their entire arrangement existed outside normal social boundaries. Very well, she said finally. Nicholas. He stood, and she realized the conversation was ending. I will leave you to your work. I plan to return in 2 weeks to review progress. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Finch can send word. Thank you. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lady Genevieve? Yes? For what it is worth, I believe you will succeed here. You have something the others lacked. What is that? Investment, he said simply. They saw Willowmere as a problem to be solved for profit. You see it as something worth saving. Then he was gone, his boot steps echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. Genevieve sat very still, her heart beating faster than it should. Something about Nicholas Claiborne unsettled her in ways she could not quite articulate. He looked at her directly, without the careful avoidance she had grown accustomed to. He spoke to her as though her appearance was irrelevant to her capabilities. It was both reassuring and deeply unnerving. She shook herself and turned back to the accounts. There would be time enough to puzzle over the Duke of Lockhart later. For now, she had work to do. 6 months after arriving at Willowmere, Genevieve stood in the estate office reviewing the weekly accounts with a satisfaction she had not felt in years. The numbers told a story of steady, measurable improvement. Profits were modest, but genuine. Tenant satisfaction had risen noticeably, and the household operated with an efficiency that Mrs. Finch reported exceeded even the property's better days. The transformation had not been without challenges. Convincing tenants who had been mismanaged for 3 years that she deserved their trust had required more than good intentions. Genevieve had visited each farm personally, walking muddy fields in practical boots, examining drainage issues and crop conditions, listening to concerns that previous administrators had dismissed as complaints from ignorant farmers. She discovered quickly that these men knew their land far better than any London-trained steward ever could. What they had lacked was someone in authority willing to listen. Letters from Philippa arrived every week without fail, full of news about life at Hartley House and the continuing courtship of Lord Victor Pemberley. Genevieve treasured these glimpses into her sister's world, though they also reminded her how separate their lives had become. Philippa wrote of balls and morning calls, of new gowns and social obligations. Genevieve wrote back about yield rates and tenant negotiations, about the satisfaction of solving problems through logic rather than luck. Their correspondence had evolved into something both familiar and strange. Two sisters who loved each other, but no longer fully understood each other's daily realities. Nicholas had visited Willowmere weekly since that first unexpected appearance, arriving on horseback more often than by carriage, his presence becoming a fixture in Genevieve's carefully ordered life. Their conversations had evolved beyond purely professional matters into discussions of literature, philosophy, and the peculiar contradictions of English estate management. He had a gift for asking questions that made her think, for challenging assumptions she had held without examination. More unsettling, he seemed genuinely interested in her answers, listening with an attention that suggested he valued her perspective rather than merely tolerating it. Today he was expected for their weekly meeting, and Genevieve found herself anticipating his arrival with an emotion she refused to name. The sound of hooves on gravel drew her to the window. Nicholas dismounted with fluid grace, handling the reins to a groom before striding toward the house. Autumn had arrived properly now, painting the landscape in golds and russets, and the cooling weather suited him. He looked more relaxed than when they had first met, less the stern duke, and more simply a man engaged in work that interested him. Mrs. Finch showed him to the estate office moments later. Genevieve had positioned herself as she always did, with natural light falling from her right, keeping her left side partially shadowed. "Good afternoon, Lady Genevieve," Nicholas said, settling into the chair across from her desk without ceremony. "The grounds look exceptional. I noticed the new fencing along the eastern boundary." "The tenants mentioned it had been needed for 2 years," Genevieve replied. "The cost was reasonable, and the goodwill gained was worth considerably more than the actual expenditure." "Goodwill," Nicholas repeated thoughtfully. "Not a line item most administrators would consider worth calculating." "Then most administrators are fools who do not understand that people work harder for those who demonstrate respect than for those who merely pay wages." His mouth quirked into that slight smile she had learned to recognize. "My grandmother would like you immensely. She says much the same thing, though usually with more pointed language about my own failings as an employer." "Is she often critical of you?" "Relentlessly. It is one of her more endearing qualities." "Woo?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that direct gaze that still sometimes caught her off guard. "Though I begin to suspect she would approve of my decision to bring you here." Genevieve felt warmth rise in her cheeks and looked down at the papers before her. "The accounts are ready for your review if you wish to examine them." "In a moment." He paused, and she could sense him choosing his words carefully. "I have a request to make, one that extends beyond our current arrangement." Her fingers stilled on the ledger. "What sort of request?" "I have 3 other properties in addition to Willowmere. 2 are performing adequately, but one, an estate in Northumberland, faces similar challenges to what Willowmere presented. I would value your assessment of the situation." "You want me to review their accounts?" "More than that. I would like your strategic advice on all my holdings, not as a temporary administrator, but as someone who understands both the financial and human elements of estate management." He paused. "I realize this expands our agreement significantly. I would of course increase your compensation accordingly." Genevieve looked at him directly for the first time in the conversation, momentarily forgetting to angle her face away. "You are asking me to serve as, what? A sort of consulting estate manager for your entire portfolio?" "Essentially, yes. Though I would prefer to avoid the term manager. That implies hierarchy and formal authority. I am proposing more of a partnership, where your expertise guides my decisions." A partnership. With a duke. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh, but the serious expression in his grey eyes prevented it. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because you have accomplished more in 6 months than 3 men accomplished in 3 years, Nicholas replied. "Because you think strategically rather than simply implementing standard practices. Because you care about outcomes rather than merely following procedures." He leaned forward slightly. "And because I have come to value your perspective on matters that extend well beyond crop rotations and tenant relations." The last statement hung between them, weighted with implications Genevieve was not certain she wanted to examine. "I would need to continue maintaining my privacy," she said carefully. "I cannot travel to your other properties or attend meetings where I would be seen by strangers. The work could be done through correspondence and occasional meetings here at Willowmere. I would bring the documents to you rather than expecting you to travel." She considered this, her practical nature warring with an unexpected flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. This was an opportunity to do meaningful work, to apply her skills on a scale she had never imagined possible. It was also an opportunity to remain connected to Nicholas Claiborne beyond the 1 year they had originally agreed upon. That thought should have alarmed her more than it did. "I would need time to consider," she said finally. "Of course. Though I should mention that I would also like to extend an invitation for dinner at Lockhart Manor next week. My grandmother has expressed a strong desire to meet you." Genevieve's momentary hopefulness evaporated into familiar anxiety. "Your grandmother?" "The Dowager Duchess Margaret Claiborne. She is 68, formidable, occasionally overwhelming, and utterly determined to meet the woman who has transformed Willowmere." His expression softened slightly. "She is also remarkably perceptive and kind beneath the aristocratic manner. I think you would find her interesting. I cannot possibly attend a dinner party. Not a party, just the three of us. A private meal in the family dining room, with no servants present, except for those serving food. Mrs. Finch has already confirmed you are comfortable dining with minimal household staff." He had planned this carefully, removing every objection she might reasonably raise. The realization both irritated and strangely touched her. "Why does she wish to meet me?" Genevieve asked. Nicholas was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. "Because I speak of you often enough that she has become curious. Because she is convinced that any woman who can manage both accounts and tenant relations with equal competence must be worth knowing. And because," he added more quietly, "I believe she suspects that my interest in Willowmere's management has become somewhat secondary to other interests." The words settled between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in ways Genevieve could not fully trace. "Your Grace," she began, reverting to formality in her discomfort. "Nicholas," he corrected gently. "Nicholas," she amended, though the name felt intimate in a way that made her chest tighten. "I cannot imagine what interests you might have that involve me beyond the professional." "Can you not?" He stood, moving around the desk with deliberate slowness, giving her time to object or retreat. She did neither, frozen by equal parts apprehension and something else she refused to name. He stopped at a respectful distance, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, but not so close as to crowd her. "For 6 months, I have watched you transform not just Willowmere's accounts, but its entire character," he said. "I have seen how the tenants now speak of you with respect rather than resentment. I have heard Mrs. Finch mention more than once that the household staff consider you the best manager this estate has ever known. I have read your letters analysing my other properties, and been impressed, not just by your intelligence, but by your clarity of thought and expression." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "More than any of that, I have come to value our weekly meetings not because of the information they provide, but because I simply enjoy your company. I find myself thinking of questions to ask you between visits, conversations I wish to continue, books I want to recommend because I think you would appreciate them." Genevieve felt her breath catch. No one had spoken to her this way in 7 years, not since before the fire, before the scars, before she had learned to make herself invisible. "You cannot mean this," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I am not. I cannot, you have seen." She gestured helplessly toward the left side of her face, unable to articulate what seemed so obvious it should not require speaking. Nicholas reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her every opportunity to step back. When she remained motionless, he touched her chin gently, turning her face so that the scarred side was fully visible in the afternoon light streaming through the window. "I have seen," he agreed quietly. "I see a woman who saved a child's life at tremendous personal cost. I see someone who has overcome pain and isolation to build a life of purpose and competence. I see capability, intelligence, courage, and a dry wit that makes me smile even when I am reviewing tedious agricultural reports." His thumb brushed along her jaw, a feather-light touch that sent unexpected heat through her. "What I do not see," he continued, "is any reason why the circumstances of your appearance should preclude me from wanting to know you better, from hoping that you might consider allowing me to court you properly." The word court hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying, and somehow, despite everything, not entirely unwelcome. "This is madness," Genevieve managed. "Perhaps, Nicholas conceded. But I have found that the most worthwhile things in life often appear mad at first consideration. He stepped back, releasing her face, though his eyes remained intent on hers. I am not asking for an answer today. I am asking only that you not dismiss the possibility out of hand. Come to dinner with my grandmother and me. Let us spend time together beyond these office walls. See if perhaps what I feel might, in time, be something you could imagine feeling as well. Genevieve's mind raced through 1,000 objections, 1,000 reasons why this could only end in pain or humiliation or both. But beneath the fear and the practiced self-protection, something else stirred, something that had been dormant so long she had forgotten its existence. Hope. I will need time, she said, her voice unsteady, to think about all of this, the business proposal and the other matter. Take what time you need, Nicholas replied, though I would still very much like you to meet my grandmother. She truly is extraordinary, and I think you would benefit from her perspective, even if you ultimately decide my other proposal is too ambitious. Despite everything, Genevieve felt her lips curve into a small smile. You are using your grandmother as leverage to convince me to have dinner with you. Absolutely, he agreed without shame. I am not above strategic manipulation when the goal is sufficiently important. That is not reassuring. No, he said, his own smile widening. But it is honest. And somehow, in that moment, his honesty mattered more than reassurance. The letter from Philippa arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the usual post but marked urgent in her sister's agitated handwriting. Genevieve opened it at the breakfast table, Mrs. Finch having just cleared away the dishes, and felt her stomach drop as she read. Dearest Genevieve, I write in some distress, though I hesitate to burden you when you have worked so diligently to secure our family's position. Lord Pemberley has formally proposed marriage, and I have accepted with father's blessing. It is everything we hoped for, a respectable match with genuine affection on both sides. But there is a complication. Lord Pemberley's family requires confirmation of my dowry, £3,000, within a fortnight, or they will withdraw their blessing of the match. Father assures me he can secure the funds, but I have learned through Aunt Cornelia that he has been gambling again in London. I fear he has no means to provide what he has promised. I would never ask you to intercede with the Duke on our behalf. You have already sacrificed so much for this family, but I confess I do not know what else to do. If this match falls through due to father's failures, my prospects will be utterly ruined. No respectable family will consider me after such a public rejection. Please write soon. Your wisdom has always guided me better than father's promises ever could. Your loving sister, Philippa. Genevieve read the letter twice, fury and frustration warring within her chest. Her father had agreed to stop gambling as part of the arrangement with Nicholas. The cancellation of his debt to the Duke had been contingent upon his reform, though Genevieve had known even then that promises from Viscount Hartley were worth less than the paper they were written upon. She folded the letter carefully and carried it to the estate office, her mind already working through impossible calculations. £3,000. She had saved a modest amount from her salary, but nowhere near such a sum. Borrowing from merchants or local gentry would be impossible without collateral, and the only asset she possessed was her competence, which could not be converted to ready currency in a fortnight. The thought that followed made her throat tighten with anger. She could ask Nicholas for help. He had the resources, certainly. £3,000 would be nothing to a man of his wealth, but asking would transform their relationship into something transactional, would make his recent declaration of interest seem like leverage she could exploit for her family's benefit. She would not do it. She would not reduce what he had offered her, what she had begun to dare hope might be genuine, into a matter of financial convenience. The sound of hooves on gravel interrupted her brooding. She glanced at the clock in surprise. It was only 10 in the morning, far too early for Nicholas's usual weekly visit. But when she moved to the window, she recognized his horse being led away by a groom. Mrs. Finch appeared at the office door moments later. "His Grace has arrived, my lady. He asks if you are available to speak with him." "Of course. Please show him in." Nicholas entered, looking windblown from riding, his dark hair slightly disordered, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. He carried a leather document case under one arm. "Forgive the early intrusion, he said without preamble. I have been corresponding with my man of business regarding the Viscount Hartley's financial situation. There are matters we need to discuss. Genevieve felt ice form in her stomach. You have been investigating my father. Not investigating. Monitoring. He set the document case on her desk. When I cancelled his debt, I instructed my solicitor to quietly observe his activities, to ensure he did not immediately fall back into the same patterns that created the original problem. And has he? Nicholas's expression was answer enough. He has accumulated new debts in London over the past 2 months, nothing approaching the scale of what he owed me, but substantial enough. My solicitor learned this morning that he has promised a dowry of £3,000 for Lady Philippa's marriage to Lord Pemberley, a sum he does not possess and cannot secure through legitimate means. You already know about Philippa's letter, Genevieve said flatly. No, but I suspected something of this nature was developing. He opened the document case and withdrew several papers. I have prepared a transfer of funds directly to Lord Pemberley's family as settlement of Lady Philippa's dowry. The money will be presented as a reallocation of the original debt your father owed me, restructured to benefit your sister rather than him. Genevieve stared at the papers. Her hands clenched so tightly at her sides that her nails bit into her palms. You cannot do this. I can, and I have. The arrangements are already made. Lord Pemberley's family will receive confirmation this afternoon. No, the word came out sharper than she intended. You will cancel these arrangements immediately. Nicholas looked genuinely surprised. Genevieve, your sister's future is at stake. My sister's future is not your responsibility, she said, her voice trembling with the effort of maintaining control. Nor is my family's welfare a problem for you to solve through the application of money. Then what would you have me do? Stand aside while your father's failures destroy Philippa's chances at a good marriage? Yes, Genevieve said, though the word tasted like ashes, because anything else makes me into exactly what I have sworn never to become. A woman who uses her association with a wealthy man to extract benefits for herself and her family. Nicholas set the papers down slowly. You believe I am offering this as some form of leverage or expectation of gratitude. I believe that accepting such a substantial gift from you would fundamentally alter the nature of whatever might exist between us. How could I ever know if my feelings were genuine or simply the product of obligation? How could you ever be certain I was not courting you for your fortune rather than yourself? She turned away from him, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. You said you valued my perspective, my independence. But independent women do not allow men to solve their problems with money, no matter how desperate the situation. The silence stretched long enough that Genevieve wondered if he would simply leave. Instead, she heard him move closer, his footsteps quiet on the office floor. You are correct, he said finally. I should have consulted you rather than making arrangements without your knowledge. That was presumptuous. Yes, it was. But I will not apologize for wanting to help someone I care about, or for acting to prevent harm to someone important to her. Genevieve turned back to face him. You care about me. I thought I had made that abundantly clear last week, Nicholas replied, a slight edge entering his voice. Was my declaration of intent to court you somehow unclear? No, it was very clear. Too clear, perhaps. Clear enough that I have spent every moment since questioning whether you truly meant it, or whether it was some elaborate scheme to secure my continued management of your properties. Nicholas's expression shifted from frustration to something that looked very much like hurt. Is your opinion of me truly so low that you believe I would fabricate romantic interest for business advantage? My opinion of you has nothing to do with it, Genevieve said, her voice breaking slightly. My opinion of myself is the problem. I have spent 7 years believing that no man would ever look at me as anything other than a figure of pity or revulsion. You are asking me to accept that you are somehow different, that you see past the scars to something worth caring about. That requires a level of trust I am not certain I possess anymore. She pressed her hand against the left side of her face, feeling the familiar ridges beneath her fingers. And now you offer to solve my family's most pressing problem with a wave of your hand. And I cannot help but wonder if this is how it would always be. You with your wealth and power, solving problems I cannot solve myself, until I become so dependent on you that I lose whatever small independence I have managed to preserve. Nicholas was very still. his grey eyes fixed on her face. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What if I told you the money was never mine to give in the first place?" Genevieve frowned. "What do you mean?" "The £3,000 I am offering for Philippa's dowry is drawn from the sum your father forfeited when he first sat down at my table. Money I agreed to waive while he kept to the terms we set." Nicholas said, his voice even. "He has not. He has returned to the gaming rooms, heedless of the ruin he courts. I would be justified in reclaiming every shilling of the original debt. Instead, I choose to see a portion of it used to secure your sister's future in a marriage she desires, in a household where she will be safe." He moved to the desk and picked up the papers again, holding them out to her. "This is not charity, Genevieve. It is the redirection of what is already mine to a purpose that benefits his daughter rather than enriching myself further. The money is already forfeit. I am simply deciding how to use it." Genevieve took the papers with trembling hands, scanning the legal language that indeed showed the transaction as a transfer of funds owed by her father, assigned to Lord Penrith as dowry for Lady Philippa Hartley. Not a new expenditure, but a reallocation of existing obligations. "This is sophistry," she said weakly. "This is accurate accounting," Nicholas countered. "Your father's debt to me exceeded £10,000. I cancelled that debt in exchange for your services managing Willowmere, but that cancellation was contingent on his reform. He has not reformed. He has continued gambling, thereby violating the terms of our agreement. I would be within my rights to demand immediate payment of the full original debt." He gestured toward the papers. "Instead, I am being remarkably generous by demanding only £3,000, and further generous by allowing that payment to go directly to benefit his daughter, rather than requiring him to humiliate himself by coming to me for help. If anything, Genevieve, this arrangement protects your father's pride while ensuring Philippa's future. It is the most practical solution to a problem he created through his own weakness." Genevieve sat down slowly, her legs suddenly unsteady. The logic was sound, frustratingly so. Nicholas was not offering charity, but rather enforcing consequences for her father's broken promises, in a way that minimized harm to the innocent parties. "You have thought about this very carefully," she said. "I have thought about little else since my solicitor informed me of your father's latest gambling ventures 3 days ago." He sat in the chair across from her, leaning forward slightly. "I know you value your independence. I know you fear becoming dependent on anyone, particularly a man with resources you lack. But independence does not mean suffering unnecessarily when practical solutions exist. It means making informed choices about when to accept help and when to refuse it." He reached across the desk and covered her hand with his, the touch warm and steady. "I am not asking you to be grateful. I am not expecting this to influence your decision about whether to allow me to court you. I am simply doing what any reasonable person would do when they possess the means to prevent unnecessary suffering for people they care about." "People they care about," Genevieve repeated softly. "Yes, you and, by extension, your sister. I may not know Philippa well, but I know she matters to you. That makes her welfare important to me as well." Genevieve looked down at their joined hands, at the stark contrast between his smooth, unmarked skin and her own work-roughened fingers. No one had held her hand in 7 years. Not like this. Not with such casual intimacy and easy confidence. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "it must be absolutely clear that it changes nothing between us. My decision about your courtship, if I make one, will be based entirely on my assessment of you as a person, not on gratitude for financial assistance to my family." "Understood completely. And you must promise to never, ever make financial arrangements involving my family without consulting me first. I will not be managed, Nicholas, no matter how good your intentions." A slight smile touched his lips. "Also understood. And may I say, hearing you use my given name even while reprimanding me is strangely satisfying." Despite herself, Genevieve felt her own lips curve slightly. "You are impossible. Frequently. It is one of my less endearing qualities." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "So you will allow the arrangement?" Genevieve looked at the papers again, at the legal language that transformed her father's shameful gambling debt into something that could secure her sister's future. It was not charity. It was not even generosity, really. It was simply practical redistribution of resources to minimize harm. Yes, she said finally. For Philippa's sake, I will allow it. But Nicholas. Yes, thank you for understanding why this was difficult, and for finding a way to help that does not make me feel as though I am selling myself for my family's benefit. You could never sell yourself, Nicholas replied quietly. You are far too stubborn and principled for that. It is one of the many things I admire about you. After he left, Genevieve sat alone in the office for a long time, the papers spread before her, and Philippa's letter clutched in her hand. Her father's failures had been transformed into her sister's salvation through Nicholas's intervention. It should have felt like defeat, like proof that she could not manage her own family's affairs without assistance from a wealthy man. Instead, it felt like the kind of practical problem-solving she had been doing at Willowmere for months. Resources redirected, consequences minimized, the best possible outcome achieved given the constraints of reality. And perhaps, most importantly, it felt like being seen and understood by someone who valued her judgment enough to explain his reasoning, rather than simply imposing his will. That night, she wrote 2 letters, one to Philippa, explaining the arrangements and assuring her sister that the dowry was secured. The other to Nicholas, accepting his invitation to dinner at Lockhart Manor to meet the Dowager Duchess. It was time, she decided, to stop hiding quite so completely. The carriage that arrived at Willowmere on the appointed evening was not Nicholas's usual travelling coach, but something altogether more elegant. Black lacquered wood gleamed in the fading light, the Claiborne crest rendered in gilt on the door panels. A footman in full livery descended to assist Genevieve, his expression professionally neutral as she emerged in the gown Mrs. Finch had helped her select. Dark green silk, high-necked as always, with her hair arranged to fall forward on the left side. She had spent the better part of an hour that afternoon staring at her reflection, something she rarely did, trying to see herself as Nicholas claimed to see her. The exercise had been largely unsuccessful. She still saw the puckered flesh, the discoloration, the evidence of damage that could not be undone. But she had also seen, for the first time in years, a woman who looked determined rather than defeated. That would have to be enough. Lockhart Manor rose from manicured parkland as they approached, far grander than Willowmere, a testament to generations of accumulated wealth and power. The main house stretched 3 stories tall, with wings extending on either side like elegant arms embracing the landscape. Windows glowed golden in the twilight, promising warmth and light within. Genevieve felt her stomach knot with apprehension. This was Nicholas's true domain, the seat of his title and authority. Willowmere was merely one property among several. Lockhart Manor represented everything he was, everything she could never truly belong to. Nicholas himself met her at the entrance, descending the steps as the carriage drew to a halt. He wore formal evening clothes that emphasized his height and the breadth of his shoulders, but his expression was warm rather than austere. "You came," he said simply, offering his hand to help her descend. "I said I would." "Yes, but I confess I spent the day half convinced you might change your mind." He tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow, a gesture that felt both protective and proprietary. "My grandmother has been impossible all afternoon, rearranging the dinner service 3 times and interrogating the cook about every dish. I have not seen her this agitated since my cousin announced his engagement to an opera singer." Despite her nervousness, Genevieve felt her lips curve slightly. "And how did that turn out?" "Surprisingly well. The opera singer proved to have excellent financial sense and reformed my cousin's spending habits within 6 months. Grandmother now considers her the best thing that ever happened to the family." They entered through doors that opened into a grand entrance hall that made Willowmere seem modest by comparison. Marble floors reflected light from crystal chandeliers. A sweeping staircase curved upward to the floors above. Portraits of Claiborne ancestors lined the walls, stern faces gazing down at visitors with varying degrees of aristocratic disdain. "They are rather intimidating, are they not?" Nicholas observed, following her gaze. "My grandfather always said the family specialized in producing people who looked formidable in oil paint, regardless of their actual personalities." A door opened at the far end of the hall, and an elderly woman emerged with the kind of regal bearing that suggested she had never doubted her place in the world. Dowager Duchess Margaret Claiborne stood perhaps 5 feet tall, her white hair arranged in an elaborate style that had been fashionable 40 years ago, her black silk gown cut in elegant but decidedly old-fashioned lines. Her eyes, however, were sharp and assessing as they fixed on Genevieve. "So you are the young woman who has transformed Willowmere and thoroughly distracted my grandson from his usual single-minded focus on business," the Dowager said, without preamble. "Come into the light properly. Let me see you." "Grandmother," Nicholas said, a warning note in his voice. "Hush, Nicholas. Lady Genevieve is not some fragile creature who requires protection from direct conversation." The Dowager moved closer, tilting her head to study Genevieve's face with unabashed curiosity. "Those are significant scars. The fire, I assume." "Yes, Your Grace," Genevieve replied, resisting the urge to turn her face away. If Nicholas's grandmother wished to examine the evidence of her disfigurement, better to allow it now than suffer through an entire evening of covert glances. "And the child you saved survived unharmed." Genevieve blinked in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "Nicholas told me, naturally. He seems to have learned a great deal about your history, though he claims you are remarkably reticent about discussing personal matters." The Dowager stepped back, nodding to herself. "Well, you are not what I expected, but that is entirely to your credit. Most women would have hidden away after such trauma. You instead learned to manage estates. Practical. I approve. Thank you." Genevieve was not entirely certain whether she had just been complimented or assessed like livestock at market. "Come. Dinner is prepared. We shall eat in the family dining room, rather than that monstrosity of a formal hall. I refuse to shout across 20 feet of mahogany when perfectly reasonable conversation is possible at a civilized table." The family dining room proved to be an intimate space that could seat perhaps 12, though tonight only 3 places were set at one end of the long table. The meal was served by 2 footmen who moved with quiet efficiency, presenting courses that spoke of excellent kitchen management without excessive ostentation. The Dowager proved to be a formidable conversationalist, asking pointed questions about Willowmere's management that demonstrated considerable knowledge of agricultural economics. Genevieve found herself drawn into detailed discussions of crop rotation strategies and tenant negotiations, her initial nervousness fading as the older woman engaged with genuine interest rather than polite pretense. "Your previous administrators were idiots," the Dowager pronounced over the fish course. "Nicholas has an unfortunate tendency to hire men with impressive credentials and no actual sense. It comes from his father, who believed that education at the proper schools was more important than practical ability." "Grandmother," Nicholas interjected mildly, "it is true, and you know it. Your father hired stewards based on their connections rather than their competence, which is why 3 estates nearly collapsed under his management." She turned back to Genevieve. "Nicholas has improved somewhat, though he still occasionally makes poor choices in personnel, present company excluded, of course." "Of course," Genevieve murmured, not entirely certain how to respond. The conversation flowed through the remaining courses, touching on topics ranging from parliamentary politics to recent developments in steam engine technology. The Dowager possessed wide-ranging knowledge and strong opinions, many of which she expressed with a bluntness that bordered on shocking. Nicholas, Genevieve noticed, seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him, participating in the conversation, but also clearly content to let the 2 women engage directly. He watched them both with an expression that suggested satisfaction, though with what specifically, Genevieve could not determine. After dinner, the Dowager suggested they adjourn to the library rather than the drawing room. "I find drawing rooms are designed for tedious social rituals that bore me to distraction," she announced, leading the way down a corridor lined with more ancestral portraits. "Libraries, on the other hand, are designed for actual conversation among people with functioning minds." The library at Lockhart Manor proved to be extraordinary. A 2-story space-lined floor-to-ceiling with books, with rolling ladders to access the upper shelves, and comfortable seating arranged near an enormous fireplace. The scent of leather and old paper hung in the air, familiar and comforting. "Oh," Genevieve breathed, turning slowly to take in the scope of the collection. "Nicholas said you appreciated books," the Dowager remarked, settling into a wing chair near the fire. "I am pleased to see he was correct. A woman who does not read is a woman with no resources for managing the tedium of existence. Nicholas guided Genevieve to the chair beside his grandmother, taking a seat across from them. The arrangement felt oddly domestic, like family rather than formal guests. "Now then," the dowager said, fixing Genevieve with that penetrating gaze. "My grandson has informed me of his intention to court you properly. I would like to understand your thoughts on this matter." "Grandmother," Nicholas said, his voice holding a note of genuine exasperation, "we agreed you would not interrogate her. I am not interrogating. I am asking a reasonable question about a situation that directly concerns the future of this family." She did not look away from Genevieve. "Well?" Genevieve glanced at Nicholas, who offered a slight apologetic shrug, then back to the formidable woman before her. Directness, she decided, deserved directness in return. "I am uncertain," she said honestly. "Your grandson is offering something I stopped believing was possible 7 years ago. The idea that someone might see past my scars to something worth caring about requires a level of trust I am struggling to achieve." "Trust," the dowager repeated thoughtfully. "Trust that his interest is genuine rather than pity or temporary fascination with novelty. Yes, a reasonable concern, given how cruel society can be to women whose appearance does not conform to conventional standards." The dowager leaned forward slightly. "Let me share something about my grandson, Lady Genevieve. Nicholas has never, in his entire life, done anything out of pity. He is occasionally generous, frequently fair-minded, but never pitying. He finds pity to be condescending and ultimately useless." She paused, her expression softening fractionally. "His first marriage was arranged by his father, to a woman from an appropriate family with suitable connections. It was a disaster of compatibility, though they maintained proper appearances. When she died in childbirth along with the infant, Nicholas blamed himself for years, believing he should have somehow prevented it, despite the doctors assuring him nothing could have been done." Nicholas shifted uncomfortably in his chair but did not interrupt. For 3 years after her death, he closed himself off emotionally, dedicating himself entirely to managing estates and accumulating wealth as though financial success could compensate for personal grief. The dowager's gaze moved to her grandson. "Then you appeared, demonstrating competence he respected and independence he admired. For the first time since losing his son, Nicholas became interested in something beyond ledgers and property assessments." She looked back at Genevieve. "I tell you this not to pressure you, but to provide context. My grandson does not offer courtship lightly, nor does he make declarations he does not mean. If he says he values you, it is because he genuinely does. The question is whether you can value yourself enough to believe him." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Genevieve felt exposed, as though the dowager had somehow identified the core of her struggle and named it plainly. "You are very direct, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I find that advancing age grants license for honesty that would be considered rude in younger people. One of the few advantages of being 68. The dowager rose from her chair with surprising grace. "I shall leave you two to converse privately. Nicholas, show Lady Genevieve the portrait gallery before she departs. She should understand the full scope of what she would be joining if she accepts your suit." After the dowager left, silence settled over the library. Genevieve stared into the fire, processing the evening's revelations. "I apologize for my grandmother," Nicholas said finally. "She promised to be tactful." "That was her being tactful?" Genevieve asked, a hint of incredulity in her voice. "You should hear her when she is not attempting restraint." He stood and moved to pour brandy from a decanter on a side table. "Would you like some? Or wine, if you prefer." "Brandy is fine." He handed her a glass and resumed his seat, studying her face in the firelight. "What are you thinking?" "That your grandmother is remarkably perceptive," Genevieve replied, "and that I am not certain I possess the courage she seems to believe I should." "Courage comes in many forms," Nicholas said quietly. "You demonstrated tremendous physical courage by entering that burning building. You have demonstrated consistent moral courage by rebuilding your life according to your own terms, rather than accepting the limitations others would impose. What you are struggling with now is emotional courage, which is perhaps the most difficult form of all." He set down his brandy glass and leaned forward, his grey eyes intent on hers. "I do not need you to be brave, Genevieve. I need you to be honest about what you want and what you can accept. If you genuinely cannot imagine trusting me enough to allow courtship, I will respect that decision. But if you are refusing because you believe yourself unworthy, rather than because you actually do not want what I am offering, then you are letting fear make decisions for you. The challenge in his words stung, but it was the sting of truth rather than cruelty. Genevieve took a sip of brandy, letting the burn steady her. I want to believe you, she said finally. I want to believe that this is possible, that someone could see me completely and not turn away. But wanting something does not make it real. No, Nicholas agreed, but neither does fearing something make it inevitable. He extended his hand across the space between their chairs. Give me permission to try. Let me court you properly. If at any point you decide this is not what you want, we end the arrangement and remain friends and business associates. But give us both the chance to discover whether what I feel might, in time, be reciprocated. Genevieve looked at his outstretched hand, at the gesture that represented everything she had convinced herself was beyond her reach. Trust, connection, the possibility of being truly seen and accepted. She thought of Philippa's letter, of how Nicholas had found a way to help without making her feel indebted. She thought of 6 months of weekly meetings, of conversations that had become the highlight of her structured days. She thought of the dowager's words about valuing herself enough to believe others might value her too. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. Very well, she whispered. You may court me. Nicholas's smile, when it came, transformed his entire face into something that made her breath catch. I promise, he said softly, you will not regret this. The letter arrived at Willowmere on a winter morning when frost still clung to the windows in delicate patterns. Genevieve recognized the handwriting before she broke the seal, elegant script on expensive paper that could only belong to one person. The letter was brief and unsigned, as though the sender could not quite bring themselves to claim the words written. Lady Genevieve Hartley, it has come to my attention that the Duke of Lockhart has been seen calling upon you with unusual frequency. As someone who has known His Grace for many years and held expectations regarding his eventual choice of companion, I feel compelled to warn you that any hopes you may harbour regarding a permanent arrangement are likely misplaced. Men of the Duke's station do not marry women whose appearance marks them as unsuitable for society. Whatever attentions he pays you now are surely motivated by gratitude for your management of his property, or perhaps by curiosity regarding your unusual situation. These sentiments, however kindly meant, do not constitute genuine affection. I write this not from cruelty, but from a desire to spare you the inevitable humiliation when His Grace realizes that a woman scarred as you are cannot possibly serve as Duchess of Lockhart. Society would never accept such a union, and he will ultimately recognize this truth. You would be wise to withdraw from whatever arrangement currently exists between you, before you become an object of pity, or, worse, ridicule. A friend. Genevieve read the letter 3 times, each reading making her hands shake more violently. The words struck with surgical precision at every fear she had confessed to Nicholas, every doubt she had struggled to overcome in the 2 months since agreeing to his courtship. Mrs. Finch found her still sitting at the breakfast table 20 minutes later, the letter clutched in white-knuckled fingers. My lady, the housekeeper's voice was carefully neutral. Is everything well? No, Genevieve replied, her voice hollow. Everything is not well. She showed Mrs. Finch the letter. The older woman read it, her expression darkening with each line. Vicious nonsense, Mrs. Finch pronounced firmly. Whoever wrote this is either malicious or monumentally foolish, or truthful, Genevieve whispered. Society will never accept me as a duchess. How could they? I cannot attend balls or dinners without causing discomfort. I cannot be presented to the Queen looking like this. Every social obligation Nicholas has as Duke of Lockhart requires a wife who can stand beside him without provoking pity or shock. His Grace knew your situation when he began courting you, Mrs. Finch pointed out. Do you truly believe he failed to consider these matters before making his intentions clear? Genevieve pressed her hands against her face, feeling the familiar ridges beneath her fingers. Perhaps he thought it would not matter. Perhaps he believed affection could overcome practical obstacles. But this letter, Mrs. Finch, this letter names truths I have been trying to ignore. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, Willowmere's grounds stretched pristine under winter's touch, beautiful and ordered. She had created this order through logic and competence. Why had she imagined that emotions could be managed through the same methods? "I need to end this," she said quietly, "before it progresses further. Before Nicholas realizes the mistake he has made and has to extricate himself with whatever dignity he can preserve." "My lady," Mrs. Finch began, but Genevieve shook her head. "I know what you will say, that I am letting fear make decisions, that I am being cowardly. Perhaps I am. But cowardice that prevents pain is sometimes wisdom." She spent the rest of the day composing a letter to Nicholas, each attempt more difficult than the last. How did one end something that had barely begun? How did one explain that hope, once granted permission to grow, had become too dangerous to nurture? The letter she finally sent was brief and formal. "Your Grace, after careful consideration, I have concluded that our current arrangement is unwise and must cease. While I value your friendship and your trust in my professional capabilities, I cannot continue a personal relationship that has no reasonable prospect of success. I will of course continue managing Willowmere's affairs and providing consultation on your other properties, as originally agreed. But I must request that your visits return to their previous professional nature, and that you make no further reference to courtship or matrimonial intentions. I apologize for any disappointment this may cause. Lady Genevieve Hartley." She sent it with the afternoon post, then retreated to her chambers and allowed herself to weep for the first time since the night of the fire 7 years ago. Nicholas appeared at Willowmere the following morning, arriving on horseback despite the frozen roads, his expression thunderous. Mrs. Finch attempted to delay him, but he swept past her with uncharacteristic rudeness, taking the stairs to Genevieve's sitting room 2 at a time. He found her standing at the window, still wearing yesterday's dress, her eyes red from crying, but her posture rigid. "What happened?" he demanded without preamble. "What changed between 3 days ago when we had dinner together and this morning when I received a letter terminating our courtship?" "Nothing changed," Genevieve replied, not turning to face him. "I simply came to my senses." "That is not an answer. Tell me what happened." She retrieved the anonymous letter from her desk and handed it to him silently. He read it, his jaw tightening with each line. "You believe this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I believe it names truths we have both been avoiding." Nicholas crumpled the letter with sudden violence, throwing it into the fireplace where flames consumed it immediately. "That letter was written by Lady Vanessa Harrington. I recognize her phrasing and her particular brand of vindictive manipulation." Genevieve turned to face him. "Who is Lady Vanessa Harrington?" "A widow who has been pursuing me for 2 years with increasingly desperate tactics. She expected that I would eventually propose to her out of convenience or social pressure." His grey eyes were hard with fury. "When she learned about you, she apparently decided to eliminate the competition through cowardice and anonymous cruelty." "It does not matter who wrote it," Genevieve said tiredly. "The substance is accurate. I cannot serve as Duchess of Lockhart. I cannot fulfill the social obligations your position requires. Continuing this courtship only delays inevitable disappointment. For whom? For you or for me?" Nicholas moved closer, his presence filling the small room. "Because I am not disappointed, Genevieve. I am furious that someone has poisoned your mind with lies designed specifically to exploit your vulnerabilities." "They are not lies!" The words burst from her with surprising force. "Look at me, Nicholas. Truly look. I am disfigured. Society will recoil from me. Your peers will question your judgment. Every social function we attend together will become an exercise in managing other people's discomfort with my appearance. So you are ending our courtship to spare me social awkwardness." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "How remarkably selfless. Do not mock me." "I am not mocking you. I am calling out your cowardice for what it is." He closed the remaining distance between them, gripping her shoulders firmly. "You are not protecting me, Genevieve. You are protecting yourself. And that is your right. But do not dress it up as noble sacrifice." She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "2 months ago, you agreed to let me court you," he continued, his voice softening slightly. "You gave me permission to demonstrate that my interest was genuine. That I valued you beyond your competence with estate management. Have I done anything in those 2 months to suggest my feelings were temporary or insincere? No, she admitted. Have I hidden you away or shown any shame in being seen with you? You have only been seen with me privately, at Lockhart Manor, or here at Willowmere, because you requested privacy, not because I demanded it. He released her shoulders and stepped back, running his hand through his hair in frustration. Do you know what I had planned for next week? A small dinner party at Lockhart Manor, introducing you to several of my closest friends and their wives. Not a grand ball, not a public spectacle, but a gathering of people whose opinions I value and who I trust to treat you with respect. Genevieve felt her breath catch. You cannot introduce me to society. Why not? Because Lady Vanessa Harrington said so in an anonymous letter. The anger returned to his voice. Or because you have decided that I am too foolish to understand the implications of courting a woman whose appearance does not conform to conventional beauty standards. Because I will embarrass you, she whispered. Because I will be the object of pity and gossip, and by extension, so will you. Nicholas was silent for a long moment, studying her face with that intensity she had come to both crave and fear. Come with me, he said abruptly. Where? To the drawing room. There is something you need to see. He led her downstairs, through corridors she rarely traversed, to a formal drawing room she had never entered. The walls were lined with portraits, generations of Claiborne ancestors, gazing down with varying expressions of aristocratic superiority. Nicholas stopped before a portrait of a young woman in late 18th century dress. Her face beautiful, except for a large birthmark that covered half her forehead and temple. My great-aunt Cordelia, he said quietly. She married the Earl of Ashton despite predictions that society would never accept her. They had 4 children, and, by all accounts, a remarkably happy marriage. She was known for her charity work and her salons, which attracted some of the finest minds in England. He moved to another portrait, this one of a stern-looking man with only one arm, his empty sleeve pinned neatly to his jacket. My grandfather's younger brother, wounded at Waterloo. He returned home expecting to be treated as an invalid. Instead, he served in Parliament for 30 years and married a woman who loved him for his mind and his courage. Nicholas turned back to Genevieve. The Claiborne family has never valued conventional perfection over character or capability. My grandmother chose my grandfather, despite his being the second son with limited prospects, because she admired his intellect. My mother married my father despite her family's objections to his cold temperament because she believed she could reach the better man beneath. Some of those choices worked out well, others less so, but none were made based on what society might think. He crossed back to stand before her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. I am not courting you despite your scars, Genevieve. I am courting you because of who you are, what you have overcome, and what you have chosen to build from the ashes of your trauma. The scars are simply evidence of extraordinary courage, not a defect to be overlooked. Tears spilled down Genevieve's cheeks, unbidden and unstoppable. What if I cannot be brave enough? What if I cannot face society's judgment? Then we face it together, Nicholas replied simply. And we surround ourselves with people whose judgment we value while ignoring those whose opinions are worth nothing. He produced a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds, set in gold with elegant simplicity. This belonged to my grandmother, he said. She gave it to me 5 years ago and told me to save it for the woman I truly chose, not the woman chosen for me by obligation or expectation. Will you wear it, Genevieve? Will you trust me enough to continue this courtship and see where it leads? Genevieve looked at the ring, at the evidence of his sincerity, at the vulnerability in his eyes that matched her own. I am terrified, she whispered. I know, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act despite it. She extended her trembling hand, and Nicholas slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the emerald catching the winter light streaming through the windows. Yes, she said softly, I will trust you. Nicholas pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made something inside her chest crack open and spill warmth through her entire body. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, for giving us another chance. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing Willowmere in gentle white. Inside, Genevieve allowed herself to believe, finally and fully, that perhaps she had not been wrong to hope after all. Spring came to Lockhart Manor with a delicate beauty that softened even the grand estate's imposing architecture. Cherry trees bloomed along the drives, their pale petals drifting across manicured lawns like snow. Genevieve stood in the private chapel, watching through the tall windows as Nicholas conferred with the vicar about final arrangements for the ceremony. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, she would become the Duchess of Lockhart, a title that still felt impossible despite the emerald ring that now resided permanently on her finger. The intervening months since accepting Nicholas's renewed courtship had passed with surprising swiftness. True to his word, he had introduced her gradually to his closest friends, beginning with that dinner party he had mentioned. 5 couples, all people whose judgment he trusted, all of whom had treated Genevieve with genuine warmth rather than pitying politeness. "They see what I see," Nicholas had said afterward, when she had confessed her surprise at being accepted so readily. Capability, intelligence, and a wit sharp enough to hold its own in conversation. The scars are simply part of you, no more remarkable than Lord Ashton's limp or Lady Pemberton's nearsightedness. Philippa's wedding to Lord Pemberley had taken place in early spring, a modest but elegant affair at Hartley House. Genevieve had stood as her sister's witness, experiencing for the first time in 7 years what it meant to participate in a social event without hiding. The guests had stared, certainly, but Nicholas at her side had provided both physical support and moral courage. Their father had attended as well, sober for once, his expression carrying shame that might have been genuine. He had approached Genevieve after the ceremony, his hands trembling slightly. "I know I have failed you," he had said quietly. "Both you and Philippa. I know my weakness has caused you suffering that no apology can erase. But I want you to know that I am proud of the woman you have become, despite my failures as your father." Genevieve had accepted his words with cautious acknowledgement, neither forgiving fully nor rejecting entirely. Some wounds, she was learning, healed only partially, leaving scars of their own that one learned to live with rather than erase. Now, watching Nicholas in conversation with the vicar, Genevieve felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. In 3 weeks, they would speak vows that would bind them together permanently. In 3 weeks, she would share his bed, his name, his life. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "My dear girl, you look as though you are contemplating an execution rather than a wedding." The Dowager Duchess appeared at Genevieve's elbow with characteristic stealth. At 68, she moved with surprising silence when it suited her. "Just nervous," Genevieve admitted. "Perfectly natural. I was sick to my stomach the morning of my wedding. My mother assured me it was merely excitement. She was lying, of course. It was pure terror." The Dowager settled onto a pew, gesturing for Genevieve to join her. "But I suspect your nervousness stems from different concerns than mine did." "What were your concerns?" "Whether I could tolerate sharing a bed with a man I barely knew, whether I would survive childbirth, whether I would be a credit to the family name. The usual worries of young brides throughout history." Her sharp eyes studied Genevieve's face. "You, I imagine, are wondering whether Nicholas will find your scars repellent when you are no longer able to hide behind high collars and strategic positioning of light." Genevieve felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is it so obvious? Only to someone who knows what to look for." The Dowager patted her hand. "My dear, Nicholas has seen your scars. He examines your face directly every time you speak. He is not ignorant of what marriage to you entails. And yet he chose you, pursued you despite your objections, and has spent months demonstrating that his interest is genuine rather than fleeting fascination." "I know all this intellectually," Genevieve replied, "but knowing and believing are different matters." "Indeed they are." The Dowager was quiet for a moment, then said, "May I share something personal about my grandson?" "Of course. When Nicholas's first wife died, he blamed himself terribly. Not because he loved her, he did not, but because he felt he had failed to protect her from harm. His son's death compounded that guilt. For 3 years, he punished himself through isolation and overwork, convinced he was not worthy of happiness or connection. The dowager's expression softened. You changed that. Not through your competence with estate management, though that certainly impressed him. You changed it by being someone who had also survived trauma, who had also rebuilt a life from ashes, who understood that scars do not define worth. You gave him permission to stop punishing himself by showing him what resilience looks like. I did not do anything deliberately, Genevieve protested. The best healing rarely is deliberate. It simply happens when two wounded people recognize in each other the strength they thought they had lost. The dowager rose, smoothing her skirts. Trust him, Genevieve. Trust that he sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. That is what love is, after all. Clear-eyed recognition of both beauty and imperfection, followed by the decision to cherish both. After the dowager departed, Genevieve remained in the chapel, letting the quiet peace settle over her. She thought about Nicholas's words from months ago, about courage being the choice to act despite fear. She thought about the ring on her finger, the ring his grandmother had saved for the woman he truly chose. She thought about Thomas, the boy she had saved from the fire, who was now 12 years old and working as an apprentice stable hand at Hartley House. She had visited him during Philippa's wedding, and he had thanked her shyly for his life, looking at him, whole and healthy. She had felt for the first time that perhaps the scars had been worth the cost. You look thoughtful. Nicholas's voice drew her from her reverie. He slid into the pew beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Your grandmother was sharing wisdom, Genevieve replied. That sounds ominous. Should I be concerned? She told me to trust you. Nicholas took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. And will you? Genevieve turned to face him fully, letting the chapel light fall across the left side of her face without attempting to hide or angle away. She saw his eyes trace the familiar contours of her scars, saw no revulsion or discomfort, only the steady regard she had come to recognize as love. Yes, she said simply. I will trust you. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her scarred knuckles. I have something for you. A wedding gift, though tradition suggests I should wait until the actual ceremony. You have already given me far too much. Nonsense. I have given you exactly what you deserve. He withdrew a folded paper from his coat. This is the deed to Hartley House. I have transferred it to you personally, not to your father, with the understanding that it will eventually pass to Philippa and Lord Pemberley, as you have arranged. But in the interim, it is yours to manage as you see fit. Genevieve stared at the document, emotions warring in her chest. Nicholas, this is too generous. It is practical. Hartley House was always meant to be your home. Your father forfeited it through gambling, but you restored its value through your work at Willowmere. This simply recognizes that contribution formally. He pressed the deed into her hands. Besides, I suspect you will want somewhere to retreat when I become insufferable, which my grandmother assures me happens to all husbands eventually. Despite herself, Genevieve laughed. You are already occasionally insufferable. Then you are well prepared for marriage. His expression grew more serious. Genevieve, I want you to know that our marriage will be a partnership in every sense. Your judgment on estate matters has proven superior to mine. Your insights have improved every property you have touched. I am not marrying you to acquire a decorative duchess. I am marrying you to gain an equal partner in managing our holdings and our life together. Equal partners, she repeated softly. That is a generous interpretation of aristocratic marriage. It is my interpretation which is the only one that matters. He cupped her face gently, his palm warm against her scarred cheek. In 3 weeks, you will become my wife. Not my property, not my possession, but my partner, my companion, my choice freely made. Can you believe that? Genevieve leaned into his touch, feeling the last of her doubts crumble under the weight of his certainty. Yes, she whispered. I believe it. The wedding took place on a morning brilliant with spring sunshine. The chapel at Lockhart Manor filled with carefully chosen guests, perhaps 50 people total, all friends and family who had been introduced to Genevieve over the preceding months. She wore a gown of ivory silk that the dowager had commissioned, high-necked as always, but elegant rather than concealing. Her hair was arranged simply, pulled back to reveal rather than hide her face. Philippa stood beside her, as matron of honor, tears streaming down her face throughout the ceremony. Their father attended, sober and subdued, offering his blessing when the vicar requested it. Nicholas stood at the altar in formal dress, his grey eyes never leaving Genevieve's face as she walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side, he took her hand with steady confidence. The vows they spoke were traditional, promising fidelity and partnership until death should part them. But when Nicholas slid the wedding band onto her finger beside the emerald engagement ring, he added words not written in any ceremony. "I promise to see you always as you truly are," he said quietly. "Brave, brilliant, beautiful. I promise to trust your judgment, value your counsel, and cherish your presence in my life. I promise to be worthy of the gift you have given me by choosing to trust me." Genevieve's own vows trembled on her lips. "I promise to believe that I am worthy of being loved. I promise to trust that scars do not diminish value. I promise to be your partner in all things, through joy and difficulty, through certainty and doubt. I promise to see you as clearly as you see me." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Nicholas kissed her with gentle reverence that promised deeper passion later, when they were private. The wedding breakfast that followed was intimate and joyful, free of the strained formality that often characterized aristocratic celebrations. The dowager presided with evident satisfaction, making a toast that brought laughter and not a few more tears. "To partnerships built on recognition rather than illusion," she declared, raising her glass. "May you both continue to see clearly and choose wisely." As afternoon faded into evening, Nicholas and Genevieve retreated to the private chambers that had been prepared for them. Standing in the bedroom that would now be theirs to share, Genevieve felt her earlier nervousness return. Nicholas sensed it immediately. He took her hands in his, holding them gently. "We need not do anything tonight beyond sleep, if you prefer," he said quietly. "There is no urgency, no expectation. Whatever happens between us will happen when you are ready." Genevieve looked up at him, at this man who had somehow seen past every defense she had constructed, who had chosen her despite society's judgments and her own doubts. "I am ready," she said. And to her surprise, she meant it. 6 months after their wedding, Autumn returned to Willowmere with gentle insistence, painting the estate in shades of amber and crimson. Genevieve stood at the window of what had become her favourite study, one hand resting on the slight swell of her abdomen, watching Nicholas confer with a group of visiting landowners in the gardens below. The Duchess of Lockhart. Even now, the title felt strange on her lips, though she had grown into it with surprising ease. The past months had brought changes she could never have imagined that summer day when Nicholas first arrived at Hartley House to collect on her father's debt. She was managing not just Willowmere now, but all 4 of the Claiborne estates, implementing innovations that had increased collective profitability by nearly 40%. Other landowners had begun requesting consultations, seeking her expertise on tenant relations and agricultural modernization. Just yesterday, Lord Ashton had written asking if she might review his estate accounts. "The most competent estate manager in England happens to be a woman," the dowager had said with evident satisfaction. How delightfully subversive. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Finch entered carrying tea and correspondence, her expression warm with the affection that had developed between them over the past year. "The afternoon post, Your Grace. And Doctor, Morrison sends word that he will call tomorrow to check on your health." Genevieve accepted the letters with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch. Tell me honestly, is Nicholas being unbearably overprotective about the pregnancy?" The housekeeper's lips twitched. "His Grace has expressed certain concerns to the entire household staff about ensuring your complete comfort and safety. 3 times this week alone. I thought as much." Genevieve sighed, though warmth flooded through her at the evidence of Nicholas's care. He had been anxiously attentive since learning of her condition, his fear of losing another child evident despite his attempts to appear calm. They had talked about it during one particularly difficult night, when his nightmares had woken them both. He had confessed his terror, and she had held him, promising that Dr. Morrison assured them she was healthy and strong, that women bore children successfully every day. I cannot lose you, Nicholas had whispered against her hair. I cannot survive losing you and another child. Then we shall have to ensure you do not, she had replied, with more confidence than she felt. But Dr. Morrison had indeed been reassuring, noting that Genevieve's constitution was excellent and that her active management of the estates kept her healthier than most women of her station. Among the letters was one from Philippa, full of news about life at Hartley House. She and Lord Pemberley had settled into comfortable domesticity, managing the estate with competence that would have surprised their father. Philippa was expecting her own child in the spring, making her and Genevieve's pregnancies nearly parallel. Another letter bore elegant handwriting Genevieve did not immediately recognize. When she opened it, she stared at the contents in surprise. Lady Genevieve, Duchess of Lockhart, I write to offer my most sincere apologies for the cruel letter I sent you last winter. My actions were born of jealousy and spite, and I am deeply ashamed of attempting to destroy your happiness through anonymous cruelty. Since that time, I've had opportunity to observe you and His Grace together at various social functions. It is evident to anyone with eyes that his devotion to you is genuine and that you have brought him happiness he has not known in years. I was wrong to suggest that society would not accept your union. Those whose opinions matter have embraced you warmly, recognizing in you qualities far more valuable than conventional beauty. I hope you will accept this apology, though I understand if you cannot. I will trouble you no further. Lady Vanessa Harrington. Genevieve read the letter twice, then set it aside thoughtfully. She bore Lady Vanessa no particular ill will. The woman's cruelty had been painful, but ultimately ineffective, and Genevieve had learned that holding grudges served no productive purpose. She would write a brief acknowledgement of the apology, neither accepting friendship nor continuing enmity. Some wounds healed best when left undisturbed. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Nicholas's return. He entered the study with characteristic energy, crossing immediately to where she stood and pressing a kiss to her temple. How are you feeling? He asked, as he did at least 3 times daily. Perfectly well, as I was 2 hours ago when you last inquired. She turned in his arms, studying his face with affection. The visiting landowners seemed impressed with Willowmere. They were more impressed with you. Lord Denby specifically asked if you might visit his estate next month to consult on drainage issues. Nicholas's hand settled on her abdomen, his expression softening. I told him you would consider it after the child is born. I am capable of travelling for another several months, Genevieve protested. Indulge me, Nicholas replied quietly. I know I am being overprotective, but I cannot help it. The thought of anything happening to you or to our child makes me unable to think rationally. She covered his hand with hers. Nothing will happen. We will have a healthy child, and I will continue managing estates while simultaneously managing you, which is considerably more challenging. Nicholas laughed, the sound warm and genuine. My grandmother says much the same thing. She claims I have become unbearable since learning of your condition. She is not wrong. Genevieve stood on her toes to kiss him properly. But I forgive you, because your anxiety comes from love rather than doubt. Later that afternoon, they visited Hartley House, now officially transferred to Genevieve's ownership, though managed day to day by Philippa and Lord Pemberley. The property looked better than it had in years, the result of sensible management and genuine care. As they walked through the gardens, Genevieve spotted a young boy working in the stables, his movements confident and competent. She recognized him immediately. Thomas, she called, and the boy turned, his face breaking into a shy smile. Your Grace, he said, offering an awkward bow. He had grown in the past year, now 12 years old, tall and sturdy. You are doing well here? Genevieve asked. Very well, Your Grace. Lord Pemberley says I have a gift with horses. He is teaching me proper training techniques. Thomas hesitated, then added, I wanted to thank you again for saving my life all those years ago. My mother says I would not be here without your courage. Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes, as they did more readily these days, with pregnancy altering her emotions. I am glad you are thriving, Thomas. You have a bright future ahead of you. After the boy returned to his work, Nicholas took her hand, understanding without words why the encounter had moved her. The scars were worth it, he said quietly. Yes, Genevieve agreed. They were. That evening, Back at Lockhart Manor, they dined with the Dowager Duchess in the family dining room. The older woman presided with her usual sharp wit, making observations about estate management and society gossip with equal facility. "I have received another letter from Lady Pemberton," the Dowager announced over dessert. "She wishes to know if you might speak at her charitable society about opportunities for women in estate management." Genevieve blinked in surprise. "Speak publicly. Why not? You are the Duchess of Lockhart and the most accomplished estate manager in the region. Your experience could inspire other women to pursue similar paths." The Dowager smiled. "Besides, it would be deliciously scandalous, which I always appreciate." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Grandmother, you cannot use my wife to satisfy your taste for scandal." "I can, and I will. Genevieve, you should absolutely accept. The more you demonstrate that capability transcends gender, the better for all women who follow." Genevieve considered this. The thought of speaking before an audience still made her nervous, but she had learned over the past year that courage was a muscle that grew stronger with use. "I will think about it," she said finally. "After the child is born, perhaps." "Excellent. I shall inform Lady Pemberton." The Dowager rose from the table. "Now I shall retire and leave you two to your evening. Try not to be too insufferably romantic in my absence." After the Dowager departed, Nicholas and Genevieve retreated to the library, settling into their customary chairs near the fire. The room had become their refuge, a place where they could simply exist together without the demands of title or responsibility. "Are you truly content?" Nicholas asked suddenly, watching her face in the firelight. "Yes," Genevieve replied without hesitation. "More than I ever imagined possible, even with all the social obligations and scrutiny that come with being a duchess." "Even with those?" She leaned forward, taking his hand. "Do you remember what you said the first time you declared your intention to court me? That you valued my intelligence and my competence, that you wanted a partnership rather than a decorative wife? I remember. You have given me exactly that. A life where I can contribute meaningfully, where my abilities are valued, where I am seen completely and loved anyway." She smiled. "Or perhaps loved because of the completeness of that seeing." Nicholas pulled her gently from her chair onto his lap, careful of her condition. "You make me better than I would be alone. You challenge me to think more deeply, to manage more wisely, to consider perspectives I would otherwise miss." He pressed his forehead against hers. "And you have taught me that perfection is less valuable than authenticity, that scars are simply evidence of having lived and survived, and that love is not about finding someone flawless, but about choosing someone completely." Genevieve felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears that came more easily now. "I love you," she whispered, "and I love you. Today, tomorrow, always." Set. As fire crackled and shadows danced across book-lined walls, Genevieve reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that first day at Hartley House, when she had watched Nicholas arrive to inspect the property her father had gambled away, to this moment of profound contentment in his arms. She thought about Thomas, thriving despite the trauma of the fire. She thought about Philippa, happily married and expecting her first child. She thought about the estates she managed, the people whose lives were improved by her decisions. Most of all, she thought about Nicholas, who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had insisted she was worthy of love, even when she could not believe it herself. The scars remained, of course. They would always be there, marks of a moment when she had chosen courage over safety. But they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, evidence of survival and transformation. "What are you thinking?" Nicholas murmured against her hair. "That I am grateful," Genevieve replied, "for everything that brought me here, for the fire that marked me, because it taught me strength, for the isolation that followed, because it taught me self-reliance, for the meeting that changed everything, because it taught me hope." She tilted her face up to his. "And most of all, for you. For seeing me when I had convinced myself I was invisible. For choosing me when I believed myself unchosen. For loving me when I thought myself unlovable." Nicholas kissed her then, long and tender, a promise renewed and a future affirmed. Outside, autumn winds whispered through Lockhart Manor's ancient trees. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds held tight to the love they had built from courage, trust, and the willingness to see beyond surfaces to the truths that mattered. And in that seeing, in that choosing, they had found not just love, but home. May you, dear listener, find the courage to be seen completely. May you discover that your scars, whatever form they take, are evidence of your strength rather than your weakness. May you choose and be chosen by someone who sees beyond surfaces to the extraordinary person you truly are. For genuine love is not blind, it is clear-eyed and all-encompassing. It sees everything and cherishes it all. That is the greatest gift one human can offer another, to be fully known and fully loved. Sleep well, knowing that your story, like Genevieve's, is still being written. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin with the courage to let someone truly see you. The end